What went wrong, in my view, with Keir Starmer is that his initial reaction was to rush to criticize the people who were worried. And yes, of course, some people committed crimes, but he wasn't worried about prejudicing their trials. He was worried about prejudicing this trial.
Keir Starmer is doing idiotic things yet again, and Kemi Badenoch is blasting him on live TV.
I fundamentally believe that this Labour government does not understand where money comes from, where growth comes from. Government doesn't create growth, it's business. And if we have people who set up businesses leaving our country, that's going to be terrible.
Kemi Badenoch is exposing Labour for being incompetent fools, and Starmer's getting anxious.
I would say that this is not about us politicians. It's not about your party whip or what Keir Starmer wants to do. This is about those victims who deserve justice.
Starmer has betrayed this nation by denying justice in the grooming gang scandal, and Kemi won't let him get away.
The Prime Minister wasn't honest enough about the fact that this killer was under investigation for terror as well as for the murders and the attempted murders. There seems to be the suggestion that in some way there was a cover-up of the fact that he was looking at Al-Qaeda training manuals. There's some kind of Islamic extremist extent to it.
Kemi Badenoch is out and about exposing Starmer for his massive blunders and criminal cover-ups.
And so many state bodies were involved, whether it was the Prevent, the schools, social services, mental health. It's like everything wrong was happening with this specific individual. The problem that we have now is that it's no longer 1950 or 1980. And when you leave an information vacuum, then all sorts of things start filling that vacuum.
The entire system was corrupt to its very core, and Starmer is terrified of the truth being revealed.
What went wrong, in my view, with Keir Starmer is that his initial reaction was to rush to criticize the people who were worried. And yes, of course, some people committed crimes, but he wasn't worried about prejudicing their trials. He was worried about prejudicing this trial. That's where you see the unequal treatment, and that's where we need to be careful.
Starmer made the biggest mistake of his career by betraying the British public and pushing this two-tier agenda.
I welcome the inquiry which the Prime Minister has said he's going to have. It needs to go further. It also needs to look at the response immediately afterwards. But with social media, we cannot pretend that we can just answer questions like we did in 1950 and 1980. Don't worry, people. We've got it. This is fine. We've got to do better.
Nobody trusts the tone-deaf Starmer anymore, and his tiny inquiries aren't enough as the public demands complete transparency.
I do think that we need to have a broader conversation about integration in this country. It's got to be active, not passive. It didn't matter so much when only a handful of people were coming from nearby countries at a very slow rate. Now, people from all over the place are coming very quickly, and because of technology, they can still keep their heads and their cultures elsewhere. This is dangerous. We need to have a serious conversation about what integration looks like.
No matter how much Starmer and his cronies try to downplay the immigration crisis, it is actively hurting our country.
We're starting from, what have we done this year? On rape gangs, we've managed to get the government to move, not to a full inquiry, but now they finally agreed that some inquiries are needed when they said none at all. We've got them to move on that. They're doing disastrous stuff on education. Absolute vandalism on the good work that we have been doing over the last 14 years.
Kemi Badenoch has completely cornered Starmer and his gang, and they're rapidly losing support.
I think the fact that we have Starmer for the next 4 years does fill me with dread, because I look at what they're doing on the economy. You know, I heard Rachel Reeves on the TV this morning just saying things that
on this show, by the
simply
we had
not,
James Murray on, who couldn't answer
things that are simply not true. And I've been going all around the country. I was in Devon this weekend, and businesses are crying out for help.
Okay.
They need assistance.
Starmer's so delusional and out of touch with reality that he doesn't even realize how badly he's ruining the country.
I think that the Chancellor needs to look at where growth comes from. I fundamentally believe that this Labour government does not understand where money comes from, where growth comes from. Government doesn't create growth, it's business. And if we have people who set up businesses leaving our country, that's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible for all of those people who want jobs, who want wage increases, for us seeing an increase in productivity and prosperity, just a better quality of life.
Rachel Reeves and Starmer are completely out of their depth, and their incompetence is undeniable. Kemi Badenoch has been blasting them for their idiotic policies, and now Labour is in crisis mode. Starmer's trying to weasel his way out of accountability, but there's nowhere left to hide for him. It's safe to say that Keir Starmer is getting increasingly nervous since his future as the Prime Minister is looking dubious. Their sinister socialist agenda is completely anti-growth and the economy is starting to crumble. This is nothing new. Labour has always hated the rich and they're too dumb to understand that it's the wealthy that create growth.
So you'll approve of her essentially softening the position on non-doms, making it a little bit easier for them to bring their money here and so on?
I don't think we should treat business people as if they are bad people just because they're wealthy. We need to look at what kind of economy we want to structure in the UK, and we need to look at the elements that are required in order to make that economy grow. That is where the money for public services comes from.
Britain under Labour is a complete nightmare for everyone. It's not just the working class Brits that are being clobbered by endless tax raids and insane policies. The rich people are also being targeted. The only difference is that while Rachel Reeves and Starmer continue with their disgusting socialist agenda, the rich have the ability to simply leave this country. In the end, it's us, the working class, that will have to bear the consequences of this shambolic government.
Rachel Reeves' growth plans depend on immigration running at something north of 300,000 a year over the next 5 years. Would you agree it's hard to see how we fill the jobs needed to grow the economy without immigration?
I disagree. I think that immigration is already too high.
As if things aren't bad enough already, Starmer and his cronies are still pushing the immigration narrative. They're trying to gaslight the public into believing that immigration is absolutely essential for growth, but that couldn't be further away from the truth. What we need truly is to fix our systems and encourage our own people to sign up for these jobs. A huge number of Brits are either unemployed or on welfare benefits. What Labour is offering is a short-term solution that will only serve to harm us even more in the long run.
There are many things that you can do. First of all, start with the people in this country who are out of work.
Yeah, you've got to train. It takes years to train people.
That's true, but it's not fair that we take doctors from poor countries who have trained them and take them away from places that they're needed. That's not fair. I lived in a country where all of the doctors were leaving to go to wealthier countries in the West. What we are doing is bad for our country and it is bad for the world. Let's fix what is going on here.
The argument that it will take time to train our own people to effectively do the jobs and so we should just import huge amounts of skilled labor from other countries is completely ridiculous. Sure, we might be able to sustain our economy for a little bit, but that still doesn't deal with the root cause. Starmer and his Labour gang are failing our people by not empowering them with the needed skills to make a proper living. Instead of pushing more welfare options, why not just teach our own people the way Kemi is arguing? Starmer knows that she's right, so he just deflects these questions to protect his fragile ego.
And one of the things that I don't think we have been doing in this country properly is having a proper immigration strategy. And many people assume that it's just something that government does. It has to go well beyond government. All of society has to do it. And that's what used to happen when we had immigration in much smaller, much more manageable numbers.
It's not just about the economy either. The biggest problem with immigration right now is that it's ruining our culture and breaking down British societies. Thanks to Starmer's idiotic lovey-dovey approach to immigrants, they're not integrating with British values and creating small, isolated communities instead. No matter how much Starmer tries to live in a delusional fantasy land, in the real world, a cohesive and similar society is needed for Britain to prosper. Many of these immigrants hate British values, so ask yourself, why are we welcoming them here?
The most extreme example of this is what we saw with the rape gangs, where people who'd been coming to this country from the 60s, from a particular region and sub-community in Pakistan, get here, stay insular, not interested in integration, and then you start seeing very, very toxic, I would say evil habits propagating, and no one doing anything about it.
The grooming gang scandal that has completely shut down Starmer and exposed him is the prime example of this lack of integration. The more time we spend handing out endless benefits and leniency to immigrants, the more they refuse to integrate. Of course, this isn't to say that all immigrants are like this, but Starmer's two-tier justice system is giving a bad reputation to all of them. In the end, whether you're an immigrant or not, Starmer and his Labour cronies are making life miserable for all of us. The details of these gangs are absolutely appalling, and Kemi dropped another bombshell.
It was quite shocking. They told me about their experiences with the rape gangs, But the most shocking thing was how they had gone to the authorities multiple times, to the police. And in one particular case, the police actually handed her, a 12-year-old, into the hands of abusers. And that, I think, is extraordinary. So the failure of state bodies, whether it's the police, social services, is one of the areas that I think needs to be looked at.
That's right, this is the worst scandal that we've seen in British history in decades. Not only did every single institution fail to deliver justice, they actually favoured the criminals. Things were made easier for these heinous monsters to ruin the lives of countless innocent girls. Pretty much every single story involved in this is just as horrifying, and the fact that Starmer still isn't calling for the public inquiry proves that he's either stupid, incompetent, or it's a cover-up.
And my view is that there are a lot of people who have to give an explanation for why they failed a lot of these young girls. And also, we need to make sure that this is not happening again. One of the things that the young women in there told me is that they think it is still happening, that they have parents contacting them now who are saying, this is happening to my daughter. So that means the problem is not solved. And it's not about, lots of the recommendations from previous inquiries, which ended up not even looking deeply at grooming gangs.
Every single person involved in this, including Starmer and his Labour gang, need to be held accountable. They must answer for their actions and be punished accordingly if they're found guilty. Even if they were not directly involved in these crimes, by just turning a blind eye to it, they become complicit and just as guilty. Kemi proves that the entire system is broken and we need deep-rooted change to snuff out everything that's plaguing this nation. By the looks of it, Starmer will be the first one to go, and maybe that's why he's so opposed to a public inquiry.
But that's just one side. There's a second cultural issue, which is the culture of silence, the culture of computer says no, the culture of move along, nothing to see here, the culture of this is not our problem, which is on the side of the state. A national inquiry needs to look at the two cultural issues at the same time. There are some places where when people behave in that way, a mob turns up and burns their homes down.
At the root of this issue, we have a culture that has been poisoned by woke nonsense. People were so scared of raising their voice in this matter that they let this injustice continue. In fact, official reports have revealed that many institutes simply didn't say anything because they were afraid of being called racist. That's how bad things have gotten, where even the police are prioritizing virtue, signaling over justice. The victims were denied and in some cases accused of lying, while many of the criminals were set free.
Is that clearly these people thought that they could get away with it. That is the thing that we should be looking at. Why did people think that they could do this and get away with it? Because if they didn't think they would get away with it, I'm quite sure we would not be seeing the numbers that we're seeing now. And I'm not afraid to look into this. I don't care what people call me, whether they say I'm jumping on a far-right bandwagon or I'm just doing it for politics. This is something that I've been talking about for a while. I said it in my big leadership speech. This was something I wanted to look at.
The only reason that these gangs still exist and this issue has been going on for decades is because the officials left it untouched. These criminals genuinely believe that they can get away with these evil actions with no consequences whatsoever. The most shameful bit is that they're right. Many of these people who were convicted by the courts are still in this country. The government did not deport them, and Starmer has always opposed tougher deportation laws.
One of the things that we did do after the ICSO inquiry was set up a gangs task force, and they found 550 perpetrators that had not been caught. That shows that there is still work to do. And the difference between a national inquiry and some of these local inquiries or the ICSO one you described is that you can't force people to turn up and give evidence. And that's why a statutory public inquiry, a national inquiry, is helpful.
Starmer and his Labour gang have agreed to an inquiry after huge pressure from Kemi, Badenoch and Nigel Farage. However, make no mistake, this was just a publicity stunt because that inquiry still doesn't force people to provide evidence and comply. What we asked for was a proper investigation. What we're getting is a voluntary interview system. At this rate, people are not wrong to think that Starmer might be trying to hide the truth from the public.
I would say that this is not about us politicians. It's not about your party whip or what Keir Starmer wants to do. This is about those victims who deserve justice, the survivors who deserve justice, about making sure that every single perpetrator we can find is caught and brought to justice, and those who failed in their duty to protect children are held to account and exposed.
What the insecure Starmer and his incompetent Labour Party doesn't understand is that this issue is much bigger than them. They're so terrified of the truth that they're completely ignoring the actual victims and the entire nation that is demanding justice. Kemi is right, they should have united and cracked down on the criminals, but what we're seeing right now from the Labour Party is pure cronyism. It's not just the inquiry and reports either, they truly have a hidden agenda that's so mind-numbingly insane that you'll find it hard to believe.
I mean, it's slightly driving us mad in this strange sort of place that we now live in that is out of touch with reality. Essentially formulated by this report that came out yesterday, leaked this report on extremism that I asked the Minister in the House of Commons this morning.
The state of the nation and this government is absolutely maddening. What we're seeing is a prime example of Starmerism, and this new leak has got him even more nervous than before. Richard Tice, deputy leader of the Reform Party, pushed Labour on this leaked report, and it turns out that their agenda is actually much worse than any of us could have imagined. It's not just Starmer either, the entire party is rotten to the very core.
The Southport horrors, and the report has been produced and it was leaked. And with the leak, the report was so extraordinary, I'll come on to the detail, that immediately the Home Secretary disowned the 38 recommendations in the report prepared for her by her own officials.
Hold on a second. She ignored it after she'd read it, after it had been leaked, or what?
After it had been leaked.
After the horrific Southport incident, everyone has been worried about extremism and how to combat it in the United Kingdom. However, Labour not only doesn't have what it takes, they're not willing to take action either. The report that the Labour officials produced was so abhorrent that the details are disgusting. Yet again, they're prioritising the immigrants over British people. Just imagine how bad those suggestions had to be that Labour ended up getting rid of that report entirely.
It's really, really simple. Anybody with a brain cell has seen example after example of two-tier policing in the United Kingdom in the last 8-9 months. I'll give you the example that Reform were very strong, which of course was the Manchester bombings, the Manchester airport attack, the two Muslim gentlemen being attacked, kicking the heads of the policemen and vice versa. We saw all of that.
They're not even trying to hide it anymore. It has become increasingly clear that Labour and Starmer thrive on double standards. This hypocritical lot promised integrity, transparency and honesty, but Starmer doesn't seem to have a shred of those qualities. The immigrants and minorities are given special treatment in this country, and the British public is fed up with it. This two-tier justice system is not only shameless, it's utterly disgraceful.
And by the way, since 1999, I think until 2021 or something, 96% of all terrorist incidents and deaths were by Islamist extremists. 96%.
96, but that's not made up or thrown out. That's a fact.
Statistic in the own report. And yet, the recommendation from this report was that actually you should downplay Islamist extremism rather than focus on the ideology of that. You should focus on behaviour. So anybody who talks about two-tier policing is pushing a far-right narrative.
That's what the report says.
That's what the report says. Literally, it says that.
They did carry out investigations on extremism, and the results weren't exactly pretty. It turns out that Islamic extremism is much worse than any of us expected in this country. How pathetic is it then that this government's own recommendation was to try and downplay this? This is just more evidence that Labour loves to gaslight and manipulate the public. These recommendations were so insane that not even Starmer had the nerve to approve them. Of course, they're instead trying to focus on all the wrong things.
I need explaining what a what the hell does that mean?
It's a hurty word on social media that might offend a woke lefty-lovey.
Sorry, people, talking to you out there in drive time land. So we're not going to deal with extremists, whether they're Muslims or not, or Islamists who blow people up or stab people to death, because let's downplay that. But we are going to arrest and jail somebody who puts a hurty word online.
Yep.
Let's get this straight. Starmer and Labour throw tantrums over mean and hurtful words online, but they don't care about the actual extremism that's costing innocent lives. Starmer is way too out of touch with reality, and we're suffering the consequences of that. This insane and idiotic government would rather downplay that and throw people in prison for being mean on the internet. Labour's priorities are a joke, and it's no wonder that their approval ratings are in the gutter.
Today we discovered that migration will push Britain's population to an astonishing 72.5 million in the next 7 years. Official figures releasing that, and yet nobody it seems to understand, although perhaps more so now, if this doesn't get dealt with Trump-esque wise, in my humble opinion, this is out of control.
Well, immigration is getting out of control with each passing day, and Starmer is too busy hiding like an absolute coward. The stats are through the roof, and each passing day, our institutions are crumbling under the weight of the increasing population. Couple that with the fact that Starmer gives special benefits to these immigrants at our expense, and you have a recipe for disaster that's making life in Britain an absolute misery. On the other hand, Trump is making Starmer look like an absolute clown.
We need people, men or women, who will roll up their sleeves, can make decisions that might not be popular, like Trump today sacking the people who won't do what he says. That's what this country needs. I believe it's I believe it's what this country wants.
What this country needs right now is a proper leader that will listen to the people and take the necessary actions to bring change. Instead, we're stuck with Sir Softy Starmer, who doesn't have the slightest clue because he's simply too dense, tone deaf, and incompetent. The public is furious, and Starmer is moving nervously because he knows that there's a huge backlash coming. It's about time that he answers for his blunders, and that's something you can help out with by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.